One day, a prisoner escaped from jail and ended up trapped in the most desolate, frozen, barren wasteland. No walls, no fences, no guard towers, just endless ice and snow stretching for thousands of kilometers in every direction. The prisoner kept walking until he finally collapsed from exhaustion. How would this prisoner ever get out of that frozen land? Let's find out. The movie opens in 1945, where we see Clemens, a German soldier. We learn that during the war, Clemens and his comrades were captured by Russian soldiers. Now they were all being held as prisoners. Every German soldier was sentenced to 25 years. This sentence had to be served nearly 10,000 kilometers away from home in a frozen wasteland. It was a strange kind of prison. No doors, no walls. And yet, escape was impossible because traveling 10,000 kilometers across the ice without food or water meant certain death. All the prisoners knew that if they left the camp, they would die anyway. So, working inside the prison was their only real option. Clemens, along with many other soldiers, was brought there. When the railway tracks ended, they were forced to march 2,000 kilometers on foot to reach the prison. Along the way, they were given very little food, and the cold was unbearable. Many died from hunger and freezing, but the rest had no choice except to keep walking. After a year and a half of marching, when the German soldiers finally reached the camp, they were put to work. Clemens and his comrades were assigned to work in the mines. After years of hard labor and Russian brutality, none of them even dared to think about escaping. Although there weren't many guards, the prison was surrounded by nothing but endless snow. It was located more than 14,000 miles away from the nearest human settlement. So even if someone managed to get out, death in Siberia's freezing wilderness was inevitable. This prison had been built right in the middle of thousands of kilometers of snow. Clemens, too, was sentenced to serve the full 25 years here, but he absolutely did not want to spend half his life in such a place. No matter what, Clemens was determined to escape. Luckily, one day Clemens got the chance. He sneaked onto a coal transport train and escaped from the camp. Once outside, when he looked up and saw the open sky filled with stars, he was overwhelmed with joy. But that joy didn't last long. After a short while, the train stopped. When Clemens peeked outside, he saw a Russian soldier standing there with a gun aimed straight at him. Unfortunately, Clemens was caught again. For attempting to escape, he was locked inside an open-air cell. The cold was brutal, and the nighttime rain made things even worse for him. He wasn't kept there for just a few hours, but for a full 2 days. 2 days later, the warden came to him in the morning, pulled him out of the cell, and surprisingly did not torture him. The warden simply said, "Your comrades are eagerly waiting for you." When Clemens finally returned to his fellow prisoners, they were waiting for him with sticks and clubs in their hands. They were furious with him because his escape attempt had caused all of them to be starved for the past 2 days. Now Clemens finally understood what the warden had meant when he said, "Your comrades are waiting for you." As soon as the others saw Clemens, they attacked him and beat him mercilessly. He was left so badly injured that he had to be admitted to the prison hospital. The doctor, there was also a German prisoner. When Clemens regained consciousness, he told the doctor, "I want to escape again, and I need your help." The doctor was astonished by Clemens's courage, that after everything he had endured, he still refused to give up. The doctor tried to explain that escaping alive from this prison was impossible. Even if Clemens managed to get out, the freezing cold outside would kill him. But the harsh truth was that if he stayed, death was certain as well. The coal mines where they worked were full of toxic carbon, which slowly entered their bodies through the air, causing deadly illnesses like cancer. So the doctor told Clemens, "You must try one last time to escape this prison." The doctor then gave Clemens all of his warm clothes, boots, and essential supplies. He also revealed that Russian soldiers often hid their food near the railway tracks. On top of that, he handed Clemens a gun for self-defense. In fact, the doctor had been collecting these items for himself because he too had once planned to escape. But just a week earlier, he had discovered that he had cancer and only about a month left to live. Finally, the doctor gave Clemens a lunchbox and said, "If you survive, please deliver this to my family and tell them I am no longer in this world." That night, once again, Clemens escaped. But this time, instead of sneaking onto a train, he chose to go on foot. He walked through the entire night and even into the morning, always afraid that Russian soldiers might catch him. By morning, when the warden learned that Clemens had escaped, he went straight to the doctor's room to interrogate him. But before the warden arrived, the doctor had already taken his own life, knowing that once the warden heard about Clemens's escape, he would torture him to death. The warden immediately dispatched several Russian soldiers to track Clemens down and bring him back alive. But even after days of searching, they found no trace of him. Clemens was fortunate. The falling snow had begun to cover his footprints, making it harder and harder to track him. Everyone started to believe he had frozen to death in the snowstorm, but the warden refused to accept it. He knew Clemens was strong and would never give up so easily, so he ordered the search to continue. Meanwhile, we see Clemens pushing forward with determination, braving the blizzards and icy winds. 9 days after after his escape, he suddenly heard the sound of dogs barking. When he turned around, he saw a sled approaching him. Before he could react, the sled reached him and passed by. At that moment, Clemens suddenly opened his eyes, only to realize it had all been a dream. In reality, Clemens had been walking on foot for 9 days, and by now his food supply was completely gone. Hunger and exhaustion made it nearly impossible for him to keep moving. But even so, Clemens refused to give up and forced himself to continue. After a few more days, his body finally gave out, and he collapsed from hunger. Hours later, when he regained consciousness, he heard a strange sound near, pushed forward, spotted it again, and just before it slipped back into the water, he fired his last bullet. Luckily, this time the shot was true. Seeing this, Clemens leapt with joy, because now, at last, he no longer had to worry about food during his journey. For the first time in many days, Clemens ate his fill. After resting, he continued on. But through this long journey, he was utterly alone, surrounded by nothing but endless snow. In such an environment, a man's mind could easily break. To keep himself sane, Clemens talked to himself and repeated positive words to stay motivated. He also constantly checked his compass to make sure he wouldn't get lost in the frozen wasteland. The days passed into weeks, and weeks into months. After walking for 2 straight months, Clemens finally spotted a small tree in the distance. To him, it felt like finding buried treasure. Overjoyed, he ran and hugged the tree tightly. This tree was proof that he had crossed the endless frozen plain. Up ahead lay the forest, and just as he had hoped, a short while later the snowfield ended and the forest began. Clemens was overjoyed. He gathered wood, lit a fire, and for the first time in months, he slept peacefully. But whether the next day would bring peace or not, no one knew. Meanwhile, we see the warden, who was still searching for Clemens. He ordered his men to comb a radius of 500 kilometers to find him. Back in the forest, Clemens pressed forward. Suddenly, a violent snowstorm struck. The storm was so powerful that massive trees were torn from the ground and toppled over. As Clemens tried to push through, one huge tree came crashing down directly on him. By sheer luck, later that evening, 2 men passed by in search of gold. They spotted Clemens and managed to save his life in time. After that, the 3 of them continued on together, and after many days of traveling, they finally made it out of the snowfield. Along the way, they reached a river. To cross it, they built a wooden raft. While crossing, they began sharing stories from their childhood, laughing and talking. But suddenly, the current grew stronger, and the raft spun out of control. In the chaos, one of the men lost his balance and fell straight into the water. He didn't know how to swim. He began to drown. Seeing this, Clemens jumped into the river and somehow dragged the drowning man to shore, saving his life. Meanwhile, their other companion abandoned them, leaving the 2 to die while he went ahead alone. That man was extremely greedy. Believing that Clemens and the other man must have drowned, he kept all of his friends' gold for himself. A little later, when Clemens and the rescued man finally made it back to camp, the man was furious at his greedy companion. Out of rage, he shot him dead. Afterward, Clemens and the man picked up their supplies and continued their journey. For months, they walked on, clinging to the hope of eventually finding human civilization. But soon, winter returned, and the forests around them were buried once more beneath thick layers of snow. The supplies the man carried were heavy, and he struggled to walk through the snow. Seeing this, Clemens tried to ease his burden and said, "Give me some of your load for a while," but the man grew suspicious, thinking Clemens might also be trying to steal his gold. In paranoia, he attacked Clemens and pushed him down, leaving him unconscious in the snow. After some time, Clemens regained consciousness, only to see a pack of wolves approaching. Desperate to save his life, he climbed up a tree, but as he scrambled upward, one wolf bit into his leg. The tree itself was weak and snapped in the middle, causing Clemens to fall hard to the ground. Certain his death was now inevitable, Clemens braced himself. Suddenly, gunshots rang out. When Clemens opened his eyes, he saw several wolves lying dead, while the others had fled. Local hunters had arrived just in time to save him. They carried him back to their village, where the people treated his injuries. After years of struggle, Clemens had finally reached human civilization. The sight of people filled him with joy. He stayed in the village for several days, where the people took great care of him. One day, however, a letter arrived, sent by none other than the warden himself. It warned that a German soldier had escaped their prison, and anyone who gave him shelter would be branded a traitor. Reluctantly, Clemens realized he had no choice but to leave the village. If he stayed, the villagers would be punished for helping him. Before he left, the villagers gave him food, supplies, and a hunting dog to accompany him. him. Now Clemens no longer felt completely alone. He had a companion. Together, man and dog traveled for many days. Along the way, they came across a lumber mill. The dog, searching for food, ran inside. To rescue him, Clemens followed. The workers at the mill quickly recognized Clemens and took him to the owner. There, Clemens told the owner his entire story. Moved by pity, they gave him food and even arranged for him to board a train bound for Germany. Clemens was overjoyed, believing he would finally return home. But he had no idea that the mill owner had secretly informed the warden. Now, the warden and his soldiers were waiting for him at the station. However, before reaching the station, Clemens spotted the Russian soldiers from a distance. Seizing the chance, he leapt from the train and fled. But his bad luck struck again. The Russian soldiers had seen him and immediately gave chase. Clemens quickly crossed the tracks, but suddenly, out of nowhere, the warden appeared in front of him. Seeing this, Clemens' heart sank. He thought all his years of struggle had gone to waste. Before the warden could arrest him, though, Clemens' dog lunged at him and bit him, giving Clemens another chance to escape. He ran with everything he had, but then a gunshot rang out. When he turned back, he saw his dog lying dead. Clemens was devastated, but he didn't stop. He pushed forward with all his strength. He climbed up a bridge and leapt down onto a passing train, escaping from the warden once again. Time passed, and Clemens continued his long journey step by step. Soon, the year 1952 arrived, 7 full years since his escape from prison. By then, he was in Central Asia, wandering around a village fair. At the fair, he saw all kinds of food stalls. He longed to eat something, but he had no money, so he forced himself to walk away. Just then, he noticed 2 girls selling pancakes. Clemens wanted one badly, but he didn't even have a penny. Disheartened, he started to leave, but one of the girls took pity on him and broke off a piece of pancake to give him. At first, Clemens felt awkward, but then he gratefully accepted it and ate. A wealthy man at the fair had been watching all this. Later, Clemens went into a church, and that same man followed him inside. As it turned out, this man had once been a prisoner himself. Instead of turning Clemens over to the police, he decided to help him. He took Clemens home, where for the first time in years, Clemens shaved and looked like his old self again. Then, the man gave him a new passport so he could cross the Russian border and finally reach Germany. Clemens was overjoyed. Before leaving, he thanked the man, then set out toward the border. Weeks later, Clemens finally reached the Russian border and showed his passport to a soldier. His heart was pounding. What if the soldier recognized him or realized the passport was fake? But luckily, nothing happened. The soldier let him through. Clemens was so relieved he couldn't help but laugh out loud. At last, he arrived at the bridge. Crossing it would mean stepping onto German soil. But halfway across, a bright light flashed into his eyes. When he looked up, he saw the warden standing in front of him. Clemens turned and realized he was still on Russian ground, which meant the warden had the power to arrest him. His heart broke. After all these years, was everything about to end here? But then something happened that Clemens never expected. The warden stepped aside and allowed him to go. At first, Clemens couldn't believe it. But he gathered his courage and walked forward. The truth was, the warden had been deeply moved by Clemens' unbreakable will to survive and his courage. So instead of arresting him, he let him return home. The warden told him, "This fight was only ever between 2 soldiers, you and me, and you've won. Go live your life." Finally, Clemens crossed the border and reached Germany. Near his home, he caught sight of his wife and daughter. A little later, when they left for church, Clemens quietly followed them inside. He hadn't yet called out to his daughter, though she had always believed her father would return one day. When she finally turned and saw him, she instantly recognized him and ran into his arms. After so many years, his wife's joy at seeing him alive was beyond words. The 3 of them embraced tightly, and with that, the true story film came to an end.